Cameron is warned his EU deal is not guaranteed. In Brussels to drum up support ahead of Thursday's summit, he's been told Euro MPs won't just rubber stamp an agreement. And snubbed by Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland wants to stay in Europe but won't campaign with Cameron.
I've no plans to campaign with David Cameron. I'll make the case I think is right.
I'm live in Edinburgh tonight, the latest stop on our road to referendum.
Also on the programme, could this be the lasting cure for cancer? The revolutionary therapy using living drugs. Missing Rose, the junior doctor left a note mentioning Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt. And standing proud for decades, the statue honouring the wrong man.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale in Edinburgh and Mark Austin in the studio.
Good evening from Edinburgh, where tonight we continue our special week of coverage at a crucial moment for Britain and Europe. David Cameron needs an agreement by Friday if there's to be a referendum by the summer. And time is running out. This week, the Evening News is gauging opinion right across the UK. Tonight, we look at what impact it could have here. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon told ITV News she won't be campaigning alongside Mr Cameron, but she does support his desire to stay in the EU. But ahead of Thursday's summit, there was a setback for the Prime Minister. The European Parliament said there could be no guarantee it wouldn't block a deal. Our Europe editor James Mates reports from Brussels on the rocky road to referendum.
A somewhat delayed arrival in Brussels after his plane broke down.
Technical problems. Yes, sorry.
Technical problems, asked his host. Indeed there are, and not just with aircraft engines, because the European Parliament is determined that it's going to exercise its rights over Britain's new deal with Brussels, and in its own sweet time.
Morning, Prime Minister. Morning.
And that was as much as Mr Cameron said today, and no wonder, because the President of the Parliament is flatly contradicting his claim that any deal done this week will be legally binding and irreversible.
The Prime Minister promises that an agreement at this summit will be legally binding. Is he correct? And can you give any guarantee that after a referendum, the European Parliament will enact the changes necessary that the British people will have voted on?
I think that there will be a very constructive debate in the European Parliament, but to be quite clear, no government can go to a parliament and say, this is our proposal, can you give a guarantee about the result? This is in democracy not possible.
But would those parliamentary leaders that David Cameron was wooing today really throw out or radically change a deal agreed this week? Even the most federalist-minded of its members didn't seem to think so.
We have said to Mr Cameron that we will be very open and very constructive to realise that.
So that's positive but not a guarantee?
That's, I should say, very positive, and in politics that is very important.
But those looking hardest for a way out of the EU see this as a crucial weakness in David Cameron's position.
When the Prime Minister says it's legally binding, you disagree?
It's not worth the paper it's written on, because no one knows in the future what the European Parliament or the European courts will do.
This may continue to be a problem for David Cameron throughout a referendum campaign, because he promised the British people they'd be voting on a deal that was legally binding and irreversible. However unlikely it is that such a deal would be unpicked, his critics will claim that it's neither of those things.
The lobbying now over, David Cameron is back in Downing Street tonight. In 48 hours, he'll be around the Brussels negotiating table, finding out just what deal his fellow leaders are going to give him. James Mates, ITV News, Brussels.
Kensington Palace has tonight denied that a speech by Prince William showed he supported Britain staying in the EU. The Duke was presenting awards at the Foreign Office today and said Britain's ability to unite with other nations was essential. Well, here in Scotland, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has admitted to ITV News that she'll be on the same side as David Cameron in campaigning for Britain to stay in the EU. She also said that should the UK vote to leave, it will raise pressure for a second Scottish independence referendum because a majority of Scots want to remain. An ITV News Comres poll showed that in Britain as a whole, 49% would vote to remain and 41% to leave. But analysis of just Scottish voters showed 59% want to stay and 31% want to leave. That's consistent with other polling. Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, reports.
The weather this afternoon in the Campsie Hills was about as inclement as you'd expect for Scotland in February. But there's a wind turbine here that can tell you part of the story about Scotland and the EU. Because the blades which were turning so fast in today's wind are assembled in this factory in Glasgow. But the British market for these £50,000 turbines has plummeted. The majority of these machines end up in Denmark and Italy. And it's why the Dutch-born boss here thinks Scotland should stay in the EU with or without the rest of the UK.
Yeah, I think for us it's important to be part of a bigger entity, and the UK is not big enough for us at the moment. We need a bigger thing than that. So if
it came to it, if the UK left the European Union, you'd actually support Scotland being independent from the UK and staying in the European Union?
If that is on the table, that would be my preference then.
That is a view shared by Scotland's First Minister, who today accepted, reluctantly, she'll be fighting on the same side as David Cameron if he gets his deal in Brussels this week. But she won't, she told us, be campaigning with him.
I've no plans to campaign with David Cameron. I don't know that his vision of the European Union entirely accords with mine, so I think I can do a better job of trying to secure, or help secure rather, an in-vote by arguing the case I think is the right one, rather than getting into a situation where I'm pretending I agree with David Cameron on things when I clearly don't.
You're aware of the accusation that you would rather that the UK voted to leave the European Union because that presents the opportunity then for Scotland to be an independent country within the EU.
I think Scotland will become independent one day. I've got no doubt in my mind about that, but I don't particularly want that to be in the context of the UK coming out of the European Union. If we find ourselves in that situation, and I hope we don't, then inevitably people in Scotland will say, you know, shouldn't we look again at whether or not Scotland should be independent?
Support for staying in the EU is higher here than in the rest of Britain, but in Scotland too there has been some movement towards leaving. And in his factory near the mouth of the River Clyde, this exporter thinks Scotland will survive just fine.
I think pragmatically we will end up with a free trade agreement because that's what will be in the interests of both parties. And if that is the case, then there will be, I don't see any upset at all.
If the Prime Minister secures a deal, the debate over the referendum will start turning. But Scotland may not follow everyone else if the result is to leave.
And our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, joins me now. Chris, what does Nicola Sturgeon actually want to happen?
Well, Mary, let's look at this. Our poll, like others, shows that support for the EU is higher in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. That doesn't mean to say it's likely, but it's certainly possible that Scotland could vote to stay in the EU, England, Wales and Northern Ireland could vote to leave. Now, would that help Nicola Sturgeon's push for independence, a second referendum on independence? You have to say yes, it would. Now, she said to me today, look, she wants England and the other nations to stay in. She doesn't want independence under these circumstances. But I think you do have to conclude tonight that if these circumstances were to arise, if they were to present themselves after this referendum, if we get it in June, the future of the UK could again be in doubt.
All right, Chris Shipp, thank you very much indeed. And let's speak now to our political editor, Robert Peston in Westminster. Now, Robert, bearing in mind what happened today, how big a setback was it for the Prime Minister, do you think?
Well, I think that he got quite a lot of what he wanted from the President of the European Parliament and the leaders of the various groupings, in that they all said that they would do their best to get the relevant legislation through Parliament. But Martin Schulz, the President of the Parliament, saying that he couldn't guarantee that the legislation would pass, well, that is ammunition for those who want us to leave the EU, because they will argue that even if British people vote to stay in the EU, they can't be certain that they will get the reform package that the Prime Minister hopes to agree with EU leaders on Friday. So it is a bit of a setback. Separate from all of that, actually, there are fairly negative noises coming out of our government that some elements of the benefit deal that he wants to strike relating to migrants may be unravelling, and some elements of the reclaiming of British sovereignty that he wants to do may be unravelling. So the mood in Downing Street tonight is tense.
Robert Westminster, thank you very much indeed. And that is all from me in very chilly Edinburgh tonight. Tomorrow I'll be in Downing Street on the eve of the crucial summit. Now it's back to Mark in the studio with the rest of the day's news. Mark.
Mary, thank you very much indeed. Now to a pioneering cancer treatment that's causing great excitement among scientists and doctors tonight. They're talking about a possible lasting cure after discovering a so-called living drug which hunts down and destroys diseased cells, preventing their return, possibly for good. Landmark trials have recorded what are being called extraordinary results. Our science correspondent, Alok Jha, has more.
The cells in green are part of the body's immune system, hunting out dangers. Now, these cells have been recruited by scientists as the latest weapon in our fight against incurable cancers.
The beauty of this treatment is it's a one-shot deal. I mean, it's literally, a tiny infusion of just, 10 to 20 million cells in many patients. It's eliminating kilograms of tumor, and that's all they have to have done.
Scientists took T cells from patients' blood. These are a type of white blood cell that fight infections in the body. They then genetically engineered them to identify and attack cancer cells. The T cells were then transfused back into the patients, where they multiplied and began their work. In one trial, 94% of patients with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, who were only given 5 months to live, went into complete remission. A version of this T-cell therapy was used on Layla Richards last year. She had an aggressive form of leukemia.
There was no other option. We didn't agree with going home to do nothing. We wanted to try it. I thought we didn't want no what ifs. We want to know that we've tried everything for her.
The scientist who led Layla's treatment said today's results were exciting, but he advised caution.
We mustn't get carried away. We think it's very powerful, the technology. We know there'll be some side effects. Some of these patients get more unwell before they get better. But definitely it's providing an avenue for patients who didn't have any other options before.
Engineered cells could one day become routine in hospitals. A new hope in the fight against a deadly disease. Alok Jha, ITV News.
Now it's emerged this evening that a junior doctor who's been missing since Friday left a note mentioning the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. ITV News understands it was a passing reference in a message to her family. 25-year-old Rose Polge was last seen at Torbay Hospital in Devon on Friday. Her car was found abandoned at a nearby cove. Sally Lockwood is there tonight. Sally, what more can you tell us about this?
Well, Mark, the search has continued here today and along this stretch of coastline behind me. It's now 4 days since Rose disappeared and a hoodie was found on Sunday, believed to belong to her, on a beach nearby. And today, ITV News understands that Rose left a letter for her family before she disappeared. It covered a number of subjects, among them a passing reference to Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt. The junior doctor was an active campaigner against plans to change junior doctor contracts. Meanwhile, dozens of Rose's friends and colleagues have been searching the coastline here today, and police divers have been seen searching the water and the cliff edges. In a statement, Rose's family has said, "We would like to thank everyone for their help, hope and kind words. The support we have received from family and friends has been much appreciated. Clearly, Rose is loved far and wide." Concern growing here tonight as they enter a 5th night since Rose disappeared.
Sally, thank you very much. Still to come on the ITV Evening News, the band whose concert was attacked by the Paris terrorists prepare to replay the gig. And the statue that's been commemorating the wrong man for nearly 40 years. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome Welcome back. There will be an emotional return to the Paris stage tonight for the rock group whose concert was stormed by terrorists in November. 89 people were killed as the Eagles of Death Metal played at the Bataclan Theatre, and many survivors will be attending tonight's gig. Duncan Golostani reports from Paris.
Their last concert in Paris ended shortly after it began. The Eagles of Death Metal were barely into their set at the Bataclan Theatre when gunmen started firing. 90 people were killed, many more injured. Among the dead, the father of Wilfred Bonnet. They had gone to the concert together.
I wanted to come, yes, to finish what I had begun with him, and also I wanted to come to show the terrorists that indeed maybe we're afraid and it's normal, but the fact is that we want to keep doing the things that we love, and especially listening to music was a passion that I had with my father, and so I wanted to come tonight.
Frontman of the band on stage that night has vowed tonight's concert will be a regular rock show, but one he has a sacred duty to finish.
I can't let the bad guys win, and I have to be with my friends again, and we have to finish this not for anyone else, more just for us. And then of course I'm talking about everyone that was at the Bataclan.
For many, tonight's concert is likely to bring back memories of the terror that night in November, but it is a chance to remember those who loved the band's music and did not survive. Duncan Golostani, ITV News, Paris.
Here, the head of Scotland Yard, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, has apologised to the widow of Lord Brittan over the force's handling of an historic rape allegation against him. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner met Lady Brittan today. She's furious at the way the case against her late husband was pursued. Our political correspondent Lewis Vaughan-Jones is outside Scotland Yard tonight. Lewis, what did Sir Bernard have to say?
Well, this was the first time that Lady Brittan received what she described, full apology from him in person. Now, Lord Brittan, former Home Secretary, and in the later years of his life, this allegation was levelled at him. Police were investigated, but he died. He died never knowing that no charges would actually ever been brought against him. And there was a delay in telling his wife at the time as well, and that is what the apology was for today. Let's listen how the head of the Met Police described that.
I've apologised for what I've apologised for, which is that I've apologised for failing to keep his wife informed in a way we should. At the time we could have done that, and that was wrong, and that's, you know, I can't put it right, but I can at least apologise. But I can't say any more about an apology.
So he apologised for the delay in informing Lady Brittan, but made no reference there to Operation Midland, a second investigation that Lord Brittan was involved in. Now, we know at the meeting this afternoon, that private meeting, but we do know that Lady Brittan handed over 30 questions. He tried his best to answer them at the time, but will now write to her with those answers over the coming days and weeks. It's clear that she wants not just apologies, but those answers.
All right, Lewis, thank you very much. The former United Nations Secretary-General Boutros Boutros-Ghali has died, aged 93. The Egyptian served as UN chief from 1992 to 96 and was the first from the African continent. Today, the 15-member UN Security Council observed a minute's silence. And finally, tonight, for almost 40 years, it has stood in honour of one of the most famous sons of Stockton-on-Tees. John Walker is credited with inventing matches, no small achievement, and so a bust was unveiled in his honour. But it's now emerged that, unfortunately, for all these years, they've been paying tribute to the wrong man, as Damon Green explains.
John Walker has kept watch from his plinth in Stockton-on-Tees for almost 4 decades, looking out over the townsfolk with pride and stern nobility. Trouble is, it now turns out it was the wrong John Walker all along. That proud afternoon in 1977, when a passionate young mayor of Stockton felt his heart swell as he unveiled the statue in the High Street, has now turned to ashes as the deception has grown clear. Pride has turned to anger, or at least to mild irritation.
Why should we let the people's efforts, ordinary people that had put effort into doing that, why shouldn't we left it as it is? No, it's annoying. This is the legacy of John Walker, his brainchild, the friction match.
The town of Stockton reveres his memory, not just in sculpture, but in song and in story. Last year, an interpretive modern dance was performed, telling how he invented matches in the high street. But now it turns out the portrait on which the town's sculpture was based was John Walker, the actor. He never went to Stockton, and for all we know, he could have had an irrational hatred for the place, everything in it and everyone who lived there. Possibly. So for now, the truest tribute to the man who first made fire in Stockton will be the light that burns every time you strike a match. Damon Green, ITV News, on Teesside.
That's it for now. Tom Bradby, and it will be the right one, will be here with news at 10. But from Mary and the team in Edinburgh and from everyone here, have a very good evening.